Hello and welcome. Waterdeep has always worn two faces. Above the cobblestones, it is the city of splendors, draped in wealth and ambition, and the kind of ordered chaos that comes from 500,000 people living on top of each other in one of the most important trading ports in all of Faerun. The Griffin cavalry patrols the skies. The city watch walks the avenues. The masked lords govern from behind their painted faces, and the whole beautiful machine keeps turning, day after day, coin after coin, deal after deal. But beneath those cobblestones, beneath the sewers and the crypts, and the layered bones of older settlements that were never quite cleared away, something else has been running a very different kind of operation. Something patient, something that watches with a focus that never wavers, something that has been down there in the cold and the dark for longer than most of the city's citizens would be comfortable knowing. Before we start our journey, please consider subscribing to the channel. It is the surest way to find your path back to our library of lore when you wake. Section 1, Origins of the Eye. The Xanathar Guild is one of the oldest and most powerful criminal organizations in the history of Waterdeep. Most people who live in the city know the name the way you know rumors, in fragments, in the hushed tones of dock workers who saw the wrong thing, and the careful silence of merchants who pay certain fees without asking too many questions about what they are actually paying for. They know the symbol, that stylized open eye, the one that appears on crates moving without paperwork, and on the walls of alleys where the city watch tends not to linger past midnight. But very few people, even among those who work for the guild, truly understand where it came from, what it really is, or why a creature that by every natural law of its own existence should never have wanted an empire decided to build one anyway. Tonight we go down to understand the Xanathar Guild at its foundation. You first need to sit with something about beholders that most people do not fully appreciate. These creatures, those enormous floating orbs of muscle and malice, with a single massive central eye and a crown of writhing eye stalks, are not built for cooperation. They are, by every biological and psychological fact of their existence, among the most aggressively solitary beings in the known world. Beholders dream, and when they dream deeply enough, when their minds drift into those strange, alien places that beholder unconsciousness occupies, they spawn. Their dreams manifest as new variants of their own species. New beholders come into existence from that dreaming, each one already convinced that its particular shape and arrangement is the only correct form, that all other beholders are aberrations, distortions of the true design, and that these aberrations must be corrected, destroyed in the language of beholder instinct. A beholder does not make allies with another beholder. It does not form coalitions. it finds a territory, usually deep underground, usually where the stone is thick enough to muffle the world. And it defends that territory with every magical weapon at its disposal, including the eye stalks that can paralyze, charm, disintegrate, petrify, cause wounds, or simply obliterate in a flash of anti-magic. It destroys anything that comes too close, not because it is hungry for violence in any emotional sense, but because proximity is risk, and risk is intolerable to a creature whose survival has always depended on trusting no one. A beholder is the last creature in all of Faerun that should want to run a criminal organization with hundreds of members. And yet, the criminal underworld of Waterdeep in the centuries before the guild's founding was, by every account, a chaotic and ultimately self-defeating thing. Thieves' guilds rose with the enthusiasm of spring and fell with equal seasonality. Smuggling rings threaded through the docks and sewers, moving untaxed goods in and out of the city with varying degrees of success, depending on how thoroughly the watch had been bribed that particular month. Protection rackets squeezed merchants and tavern owners in the lower wards. Assassins advertised their services to anyone with the gold to afford them, and the sense not to ask where the body would end up. None of it cohered. The people who rose to the top of these organizations tended to die at the hands of their own lieutenants within a few years at most, and the structures they left behind splintered into competing fragments that fought over territory until something new coalesced briefly and then collapsed again. The underground of Waterdeep was the resource everyone recognized and nobody could hold. The city sits atop a geological and historical wonder that most of its residents never think about. The underground is not simply a cellar system or an extended sewer network. It is a layered archive of everything the site has ever been. Near the surface, you have the functional infrastructure of a living city, the drain pipes and utility passages and forgotten cellars bricked up when the buildings above them were demolished. Below that layer lie the remnants of older settlements entirely. Whole streets and houses and market squares that were simply built over as Waterdeep expanded across the centuries, still standing in the permanent underground dark, frozen at whatever moment they were buried. Below that, the first levels of Undermountain begin, the vast dungeon complex carved out and endlessly expanded by the mad wizard Halaster Blackcloak, whose compulsive centuries of construction produced a dungeon that has swallowed entire adventuring parties whole and has never been fully mapped by anyone who survived the attempt. And threading through all of it, connecting levels that predate even Halaster's work, are passages of much older making. Passages cut with dwarfcraft in an age before Waterdeep existed. Passages of elven origin from when the surface above was a very different landscape. And passages that belong to nothing scholars have been able to attribute to any known civilization at all. Their stones smooth in ways no recorded tool has produced. Their angles occasionally wrong in ways that make the compass needle twitch. For criminals, this underground was a gift of incalculable value. You could move contraband across the entire span of the city without touching a single monitored street. You could vanish in the dock ward and reappear in the sea ward with no record of the journey. You could store goods, conceal fugitives, run meetings, conduct operations of every kind in spaces the City Watch did not know existed and would not easily enter even if they did. The problem was always the danger. Halaster's dungeon levels were filled with things that killed explorers with cheerful regularity. The cave systems below those levels, which connected Undermountain to the broader Underdark and allowed things from the deep places of the world to drift upward, were worse. Creatures that should not have been in a tunnel beneath a human city had a habit of establishing themselves there. Any organization trying to maintain reliable passage through the underground faced constant attrition, and the passages themselves were not static. Halaster rearranged his dungeon as a form of entertainment. Tunnels that had been safe last month were sometimes different things this month. Nobody had managed to solve this problem until they did. The exact moment of the Guild's founding is not something that survives cleanly in any official record. Waterdeep's historians, working from fragmented documents and merchants' correspondence and legal records that describe effects rather than causes, can trace signs of a new and unprecedented coherence in the city's criminal ecosystem, back through what appears to be several centuries of continuous operation. What those records reflect is a pattern, not a single dramatic event, but a gradual shift, a new organizing intelligence appearing where chaos had been the permanent condition of the underworld. Based on the way that pattern develops across the earliest surviving evidence, we can reasonably infer that the Guild's foundational arrangements were well established long before most of the written record begins to notice them clearly. What does survive is the founding story as the Guild itself preserves it, passed between members, the way founding myths always travel, in layers of retelling that add weight and distance in equal measure. Guild lore holds that a presence in the deep Undercity, one that had already established itself in passages no surface criminal had ever reliably controlled, began reaching outward. The criminal operators who ran the city's underworld received communications that arrived through means no ordinary messenger could explain. Words found inscribed into stone surfaces that had been blank and clean the night before. Voices in rooms where no one else was present. Instructions that appeared with a specificity that implied the sender already knew far more about the recipient than any spy network the recipient was aware of should have been able to gather. The content was consistent across every recipient. There was something below. It wished to meet. A location was given. Guidance would be provided to anyone who chose to attend. Guild accounts, the kind that circulate in the careful private conversations of long-serving members, claim that some recipients who ignored the invitation did not ignore it indefinitely. The stories say that these individuals were found dead within days, their bodies otherwise unmarked, but their eyes simply and inexplicably absent. The accounts describe the sockets as clean in a way that no weapon produces, as though the eyes had never been there. Whether this reflects something that literally happened or represents the kind of dramatic elaboration that every powerful organization's founding mythology accumulates over generations. It is worth noting that the effect on the surviving recipients would have been identical either way. They followed the guidance. What that first meeting looked like can only be reconstructed from inference. We know the terrain that was being navigated, the deep passages below Undermountain, and we know the creature that would have been waiting at the end of them. Based on everything we understand about how beholders claim and hold territory, the chamber would have been organized entirely around one principle: that nothing in the room could exist outside the range of the creature's attention. The terms that were offered would not have been presented as negotiable. The underground was its territory. Tribute would flow upward on a schedule that would be communicated. Directives would be followed when issued. Information would be delivered accurately and completely. In exchange, access to the tunnels, protection from competing organizations that refused to cooperate, and survival of the meeting itself, which was a conditional outcome rather than a guarantee until agreement was reached. The name it gave was the Xanathar. Where that name comes from has never been agreed upon by anyone with access to the question. Several theories circulate. One holds that the word derives from a term in deep speech, the language of aberrant creatures with connections to the far realm, and carries meaning related to observation or total perception. A second argues that the beholder chose the name because it carried no prior meaning in any language. Its new subjects would recognize clean sound that would accumulate only the associations the guild gave it over time. The third theory is the one that grows most interesting once you understand the full sweep of what followed. It suggests that the name was not invented, but claimed. That Xanathar was already a word with some weight in the deep Undercity's oldest memory, something that predated the beholder's own arrival, and that the creature recognized it and stepped into it rather than inventing something new. We cannot confirm which of these is true. What we can say is that the choice, however it was made, proved to be the most durable organizational decision in the Guild's history. The name was never personal. The Xanathar was a title, a position, an office that could pass between bearers, while the symbol and the authority remained unbroken. That distinction between name as identity and name as role is the structural key to everything the Guild became across the centuries that followed. Every challenge, every disruption, every violent internal transition would roll off the organization like water off stone, because the institution carried the name of the role rather than the holder. The Guild grew quietly in its early period, not through spectacle, but through patient, methodical expansion that reflected the beholder's particular genius. The most durable power is not the kind you display, but the kind you never need to. The Guild's presence above ground was kept deliberately ambiguous. You knew what the eye symbol meant. You knew certain streets operated under arrangements the watch could not fully explain. But the source of those arrangements, the actual chain of command, the actual creature making every decision, remained invisible. The Guild presented itself as something vague and inevitable, the way weather presents itself. You cannot arrest weather. The masked lords of Waterdeep understood what was developing before most of the city did. They could read the signs clearly enough in the behavior of the criminal ecosystem, the new reliability of certain smuggling operations, the coordinated quality of disappearances that implied a directing intelligence rather than opportunistic violence. The lords increased patrols and made arrests where they could, but they also reached a private conclusion that the public record never needed to reflect. They could not reach the top of this organization through any conventional approach. The tunnels below Undermountain were not terrain the City Watch could enter in meaningful numbers and expect to return from. The creature at the end of those tunnels was not something a squad of guardsmen could subdue. So the lords adapted in the way that practical governance sometimes requires: monitoring, gathering intelligence, identifying leverage where it existed, and occasionally extending an official blindness when a guild operation happened to align with the city's interests. It was not a comfortable arrangement. Nobody was proud of it, but it was stable, and the guild, given that stability, dug its roots deeper into the bedrock of the city above. The open eye had been on the walls long enough that some of the people who saw it had no memory of a time before it was there. And in the cold and quiet of the deep places below, the thing that put it there floated in the permanent dark and watched and counted and waited with the patience of something that had no deadlines and intended to keep waiting for as long as the stone around it held. The eye was always open, and in the deep, cold, lightless places beneath the greatest city in the world, it had just begun to see everything. Section 2. The architecture of an empire. The tunnels do not announce themselves. That is the first thing you need to understand about the physical world the guild inhabits. You could walk every official street in Waterdeep for the rest of your life, from the broad, clean avenues of the Sea Ward to the tight alleys of the Field Ward, where the cobblestones run out and the mud begins. And you would never see a door, a grate, a passage, or a marker that showed you where the other city begins. The transition between the one Waterdeep and the other is invisible by design, tucked behind false walls in cellar storerooms, beneath flagstones in private courtyards, inside cistern structures that appear functional and sealed from the outside, inside dry wells in courtyards that nobody tends. The underground is a city that learned to make itself unfindable from above, and it has had centuries to perfect the art. To truly understand what the Xanathar Guild built and how it built it, you need to descend through what lies beneath Waterdeep in distinct layers. The first layer, just below street level, is functional infrastructure. Sewers, water channels, utility passages connecting buildings, old forgotten cellars from structures demolished 100 years ago and never properly cleared. This layer is known to the City Watch, or at least acknowledged by them, and the Guild uses it without considering it home territory in any deep sense. It is the marketplace layer, the place where quick exchanges happen, where messages get left and picked up, where low-level guild operations maintain their supply routes through the city's visible body. Below that, the architecture becomes historical. Waterdeep was not always what it is now. The mount that gives the city its name has hosted human settlement in various forms for more than 1,000 years. And before human settlement, it hosted other things. As you descend past the functional infrastructure, you enter the buried remains of earlier versions of the city itself. Foundations of buildings that stood before current structures were raised over them. Streets that were paved over when city planning decided to raise the ground level and begin again. In some sections, these buried districts are remarkably intact. The stone construction of older Waterdeep was not inferior work. Given no weather exposure and no traffic, given only the stable cold of underground permanence, the walls and archways and floors of earlier ages have waited. The Guild uses these buried districts for operations requiring more space than the upper tunnels can provide. Storage, meeting rooms, holding areas for people who need to be somewhere the city does not officially know they are. And below that layer, the world changes in character entirely. The third level of Undermountain, in the geography that Halaster Blackcloak's centuries of construction produced, runs along a river called the Sargoth. The river moves through the mountain's deep levels with the slow, purposeful pace of underground water that has found its channel. and kept it through geological ages. It is cold and dark, and the current carries a weight that surface rivers do not, the weight of depth, of enormous stone ceilings pressing down on air that has nowhere else to go. The Sargoth connects eventually to the harbor through passages that are not mapped in any document held above ground, and along its banks, in a cavern that may have predated Halaster's involvement entirely, something grew that was not quite a city and not quite a dungeon, but carried the atmosphere of both. Skullport. The name covers a settlement that has no real parallel in the surface world. You can reach for comparisons. Places of questionable legality and minimal civic governance, where commerce runs on the principle that the buyer and seller's agreement is the only law that applies. But those comparisons flatten what Skullport actually is. The settlement clings to the cavern walls around the Sargoth River like an accumulation rather than a construction. Buildings of different materials and different architectural periods stacked against each other in arrangements that suggest growth rather than planning. Stone structures from eras when the settlement was older sit alongside timber-framed buildings assembled by hands that had more urgency than craftsmanship. Rope bridges cross between elevated sections. Docks extend into the dark water. The river carries boat traffic and has for centuries shallow draft vessels moving goods that no surface harbor would accept. The docks are lit by a variety of means: torches and magical sources, and bioluminescent materials harvested from deeper in the mountain. And the combined effect is a perpetual amber and blue twilight that makes the whole district feel like something preserved rather than currently living. Who built Skullport originally is a question that produces more answers than certainty. The oldest structures show what appear to be influences from several different civilizations, none of them exclusively human. There are walls shaped with angular cuts, consistent with Drow stonecraft. There are sections with vaulted ceilings and specific proportions that suggest dwarven construction preferences. And there are portions of the oldest districts whose curved, organic forms are harder to attribute, based on what we know about illithid construction preferences, and the mind flares historical presence in the Underdark directly below Waterdeep. It is reasonable to consider that some of these oldest sections may reflect their influence, though it is worth noting that attributing specific sections to specific civilizations with certainty is beyond what the surviving evidence cleanly supports. What the architecture does collectively suggest is that the settlement accumulated across many centuries as different groups discovered that the Sargoth level provided exactly what anyone operating outside official oversight requires: deep enough to be unmonitorable, connected enough to the surface to conduct business, and critically, governed by something that kept the chaos from simply becoming destruction. That governing presence takes its most visible and most unsettling form in the skulls of Skullport. These are a collection of disembodied humanoid skulls that float through the settlement with the unhurried confidence of entities that have been here longer than anyone currently living and intend to remain here longer than anyone currently present. The skulls are ancient. Their exact origin and the nature of what they actually are, whether they are enchanted artifacts, bound spirits, or something that does not fit neatly into either category, is one of those questions about Skullport that its longest residents tend to answer with a shrug, and the practical observation that it does not especially matter. What matters is what the skulls do. They enforce something in Skullport. Calling it law would give it more consistency than it actually has. The skulls respond to specific violations. Mass violence that threatens the settlement's structural integrity draws their attention reliably. Damage to the docks and waterways gets a response. Certain categories of transaction that even Skullport finds excessive will bring one or several of the skulls drifting toward the source of the offense with a speed that their leisurely, ordinary movement would not suggest they possess. Beyond those categories, their enforcement is selective and follows rules that they have never clearly articulated to anyone's satisfaction. The skulls speak, sometimes at length, in the elevated and somewhat theatrical manner of entities that have had a very long time to form opinions about everything. The opinions are not always relevant to the immediate situation. This is part of what makes them simultaneously respected and deeply unsettling. They are not neutral arbiters in any clean sense. They are old and interested, and operating by a logic that has had centuries to diverge from anything a newcomer to the settlement would find intuitive. For the Xanathar Guild, Skullport functions as the primary logistical hub for everything the organization moves through the Undercity. The docks process goods arriving via the Sargoth from the harbor, moved on vessels too unmarked to attract surface customs inspection. The settlement's resident population, a mixture of drow traders, duergar merchants, surface criminals operating below their own laws, and independent agents of various species and persuasions, provides the guild with a labor pool, an intelligence market, and a consumer base for services that the surface cannot supply. Information gathered in Skullport tends to be good, because information is one of the primary currencies of the place, and everyone who lives there has professional reasons to develop reliable sources. The guild does not own Skullport in any formal or declared sense. The skull's presence and authority make singular ownership claims effectively unenforceable. But the guild's operational footprint in the settlement is thorough enough that the distinction becomes a matter of definition rather than practical reality. the major trading operations that handle significant volume on the docks have working relationships with guild representatives. The information brokers, who maintain networks above and below ground, tend to give the guild first access to what they have gathered. The private spaces the settlement offers, the locked storage, the secured meeting rooms, the places where people who do not officially exist can sleep without immediate risk, are heavily supported by guild infrastructure and investment. Deeper still, past Skullport and the Sargoth level, past the passages where Undermountain becomes genuinely lethal rather than merely dangerous. The guild maintains what its members refer to as the Underhalls. This is not a single chamber, but a collection of secured spaces that the Xanathar has claimed over its tenure through a combination of direct clearance of prior occupants, and in cases where direct confrontation was impractical, a kind of hostile, sustained coexistence with things too dangerous to fight and too inconvenient to root around. The Underhalls serve as the guild's interior, where operations that cannot risk any surface exposure are conducted, where the most sensitive prisoners are held, where things the guild has acquired and is not yet ready to use or sell are stored. And at the center of the Underhalls, in a chamber that the guild's members who have been inside it tend to describe with a consistent set of impressions, regardless of which era they served in, the Xanathar has established its lair. The specific details of the chamber's physical construction, beyond the broad strokes, are not fully documented anywhere accessible to outside study. What the sources do consistently describe is the scale, large enough that its walls are not the first thing you register when you enter, with a ceiling height that accommodates a creature navigating primarily by floating. The overall environment is cool, dry, and very quiet. These qualities are not incidental. They reflect exactly what a creature with a beholder's sensory range requires. A controlled environment without the ambient noise and thermal variation of the surface world, where every sound in the chamber carries with a clarity that leaves nothing unheard. The spatial logic of the chamber reflects the spatial logic of beholder perception. Every entrance, every section of the room, every person standing anywhere in the space can be covered by at least one eye stalk at all times. Whether this reflects deliberate architectural planning or simply the way a beholder naturally organizes any territory it has held long enough, is a question worth sitting with. Based on everything we know about how beholders relate to their lairs, the two possibilities may not be meaningfully different. A beholder does not experience its environment as separate from itself after long enough occupation. The lair becomes an extension of the creature's own perceptual field, and in one section of the chamber, receiving more of the available light than any other single location in the room, there sits the fish tank. It is built into the stone of the wall, placed against it, not resting on a surface in front of it. Built into it, with a permanence that suggests a structural installation rather than furniture placement. The glass is thick. The water is clean. The temperature is maintained. Inside the tank, moving in the slow elliptical patterns of a well-fed and entirely unbothered goldfish, swims Silger. Silger is important, not because of what Silger is, which is a goldfish, entirely ordinary by every biological measure, but because of what Silger represents inside the psychology of the creature, who maintains the tank with an attentiveness that it reserves for nothing else in its operation quite so consistently. That story belongs to the next layer of this telling, because to understand how the guild actually functions across centuries, how an organization that should be psychologically impossible for its leader species to sustain has lasted as long as it has, you need to spend some time inside a beholder's mind. And that is a strange and complicated and occasionally terrifying place to visit. Section 3. The mind behind the eye. A beholder does not sleep the way you sleep. There is no gradual dimming of awareness, no comfortable surrendering of consciousness to a passive dark. When a beholder's mind descends into its rest state, it does not go quiet. It goes somewhere else entirely. The central eye closes, which is itself a significant event, because the antimagic cone that the central eye projects in waking hours is one of the creature's primary defenses. And closing it means a vulnerability that the waking mind would never willingly accept. The eye stalks slow their independent movements, but do not go still. And in the space behind that closed central eye, the beholder's mind begins to generate. What beholders dream is themselves, not memories, not reconstructions of waking experience, not the symbolic processing of the day's events that constitutes most of what humanoid dreaming produces. Beholders dream forms. They dream bodies. They dream variants and configurations of the shape that they recognize as correct, the specific proportions and arrangement of their own physical structure. And then the dream mind does something that no other known species produces in sleep. It generates competing versions, other beholders, versions that are wrong, that differ from the dreamer's own template in ways ranging from subtle to severe. And the dreaming mind registers these wrong versions with a horror that does not have a clean equivalent in humanoid emotional vocabulary. Not quite fear, not quite disgust, something older and more absolute than either. A recognition that wrongness is present in a space where only correctness belongs. Sometimes these dream beholders do not stay in the dream. The process by which a beholder's dreaming actually manifests a new physical creature is documented in arcane scholarship. but not fully explained by it. What is understood is that it happens. New beholders emerge from the sleeping minds of older ones, already adult, already fully formed, already convinced that their form is the correct one, and all others are aberrations. The parent beholder, upon waking, typically recognizes the offspring as precisely the kind of wrong variant its dreaming produced and responds accordingly. The offspring has the same response in reverse. Beholder reproduction is, by any measure, a deeply unfriendly event for everyone involved. This means that a beholder grows into its existence already knowing, at the most foundational level of its identity, that other versions of itself are out there, and that they are not simply rivals, but existential threats. Not competitors in the way that humanoid predators compete with each other. Wrong things wearing a shape that should be right. The paranoia that defines beholder behavior everywhere it has been observed is not a psychological aberration from some healthier baseline. It is the completely consistent response of a creature whose entire biological history has made other members of its own species into the primary danger in its environment. The paranoia is the rationality. Now layer onto this foundational paranoia the intelligence. Beholders are extraordinarily intelligent, not in the way that a clever human is intelligent, where cleverness involves the ability to quickly navigate social information and find angles and make rapid connections, in the way that a mind with effectively perfect recall and an analytical precision that never clouds with sentiment or fatigue can be intelligent. A beholder remembers everything it has perceived, the face of every creature it has ever observed, every word of every conversation it has been part of or overheard, every transaction and every detail of every transaction, and every implication that detail carries. When a beholder tells you it knows something about you, it is not performing the bluff that human manipulators perform when they suggest they know more than they do. It has the information, cataloged, cross-referenced, retrievable at any moment, with a precision that no humanoid memory system could sustain. Put these two things together: the absolute conviction that everything different from itself is a potential threat, and the perfect memory that accumulates every piece of information about every person and organization in its environment. And you arrive at the particular kind of intelligence that runs the Xanathar Guild. It is an intelligence that never stops gathering, that never fully relaxes its threat assessment, that sees every person who approaches it, no matter how long their service, as a variable to be monitored rather than a relationship to be sustained. It maintains relationships only in the sense that it has not yet found sufficient reason to terminate them. The termination is never fully removed from consideration. Not for anyone, And yet, for one small, orange, entirely uncomprehending creature, that calculus operates differently than it does for everything else in the beholder's world. Silgur is not a remarkable goldfish by any external measure. The fish has no unusual coloring beyond the ordinary orange gold of the species. It performs no tricks. It has no magical properties. It does not understand that it lives in the lair of one of the most dangerous creatures in Waterdeep. It swims its slow ellipses in the tank built into the stone of the Xanathar's chamber. It eats what it is fed. It attends to the business of being a goldfish with the completeness of a creature that has no other concerns. And it is not aware that there is a being floating nearby whose central eye tracks its movement with a consistency it reserves for nothing else quite so steadily. The Xanathar loves Silgur. That sentence, in the context of everything you now understand about beholder psychology, is genuinely remarkable. Not love in the complicated, conditional, ambivalent way that humanoids love things. Something that reads more like the pure, uncomplicated focus that the beholder's mind, stripped of its threat assessment and its perfect cataloging of everyone's potential betrayal, apparently finds available only for a creature that cannot threaten it in any conceivable way. Silgur has no ambitions. Silgur has no loyalties that could be compromised. Silgur does not report to rival factions or plot against the Xanathar's position. Silgur swims. Silgur is, in the most profound possible sense, safe. And safety, for a creature whose waking hours are spent in permanent vigilance against everything around it, may be the rarest thing in its entire experience. The Guild's members understand what this means for their own conduct. The care and maintenance of Silgur is not a trivial or incidental responsibility within the organization. There is a specific member, a halfling named Ott Steeltoes, whose role within the guild includes attending to Silgur's well-being. This is treated with the seriousness it deserves, which is the seriousness of someone who understands precisely what is at stake if anything goes wrong. The water temperature is monitored. The feeding schedule is maintained. Anyone entering the Xanathar's chamber understands, before they enter, that the fish tank is not to be approached without reason, touched casually, or discussed with anything less than complete and visible respect. What the consequences of harm to Silgur would look like is something the Guild prefers to reason about in advance, rather than discover through experience. Based on how the Xanathar responds to threats against things it has far less investment in, and based on what we know about the degree to which Silgur represents the one uncomplicated attachment in an otherwise entirely guarded inner life, it is not difficult to infer that those consequences would be severe and would extend outward well beyond whoever was directly responsible. The The Xanathar's ability to distinguish between negligence and malice is real, but does not reliably moderate the response when the thing damaged is the one thing it has no capacity to be cold about. Now take this psychology, this specific combination of absolute paranoia, perfect memory, deep intelligence, total solitary conviction, and that one inexplicable soft point, and apply it not just to one creature, but to an office. Because the Xanathar who holds the title today is almost certainly not the same creature who first assembled the city's criminals in the deep chamber and laid down the terms that shaped everything that followed. The tradition of the title as an office rather than a personal name means that the Guild's history is, at its core, a history of transitions that were specifically designed to be invisible from the outside. And the details of those transitions, who held the title, and for how long, and how they came to lose it, are not documented in any source that outside scholars can access reliably. What we can work from is the pattern of what the Guild looked like across different historical periods, the organizational character that different eras of its operation project through the secondary evidence of merchants' records, legal proceedings, and contemporary accounts. The Guild's earliest documented period, reaching back through what appears to be several centuries of operation, reflects an organizational character that most analysts describe as patient and methodical. Operations during this earliest recoverable phase expanded without dramatic public exposure. The approach was consistent. The criminal ecosystem of Waterdeep developing a new coherence without the kind of spectacle that would force the city's power structures into organized response. This consistency across what may have been an extremely long span of time could suggest a single governing intelligence operating across it. But it is equally possible that the organizational culture established by the founding Xanathar was robust enough that subsequent holders of the title continued it faithfully. We cannot be certain which explanation is correct, and the Guild's own internal records are not available to resolve the question. What the historical record does preserve more clearly than any individual Xanathar's biography is the pattern of continuity through transition. The eye symbol remained on the walls of the city through periods when Waterdeep's legitimate governance changed substantially. It remained through the time of troubles in 1358 by Dale reckoning, that catastrophic period when the gods were cast from their divine homes and walked the surface of Faerun in mortal form. And magic across the world behaved in ways that made every operation dependent on magical infrastructure suddenly unreliable. It remained through the recovery from that crisis and through the political changes to Waterdeep's governance that followed. This suggests that whatever internal transitions the Guild underwent, the structure built around the title, rather than any individual, was durable enough to absorb them. The current Xanathar, the one whose lair and whose goldfish and whose inner circle you have been tracing in this telling, has held the title for a period whose beginning is not precisely documented. Canon sources describe it as having held power during the events of the dragon heist, without specifying exactly when it came to power, or how the transition from its predecessor occurred. What can be said with confidence is that the current Xanathar reflects a character that is distinctly its own, rather than simply a continuation of a consistent institutional baseline. By the standards of what beholders are, the current Xanathar is unusual in one specific and significant way. Its paranoia is standard issue for the species. Its intelligence and memory and appetite for total information control over its territory are consistent with beholder nature generally. What stands apart is the quality of its curiosity. The current Xanathar accumulates knowledge the way its predecessors accumulated gold and territory, as something with inherent value beyond its strategic application. If the eye sees it, the mind wants to understand it completely, not just threats and vulnerabilities, and the information needed to manage its criminal operation. Everything. This quality produced something that no previous Xanathar appears to have felt the need to create. A document, the Xanathar's guide to everything. The current guildmaster decided, at some point during its tenure, that it had observed enough of the world above and below to write a comprehensive account of how that world works. Not a strategic memo or an operational manual. A guide to everything. An account of professions and skills, and knowledge categories and techniques, and the structures by which creatures live and fight and build. Written from the position of something that has spent an extended period watching all of it from below, and has arrived at the conclusion that its perspective is uniquely complete. The document exists, and copies have circulated beyond the guild's membership. The voice in it is unmistakably beholder in its delivery, absolute confidence, without apparent awareness that qualification might be appropriate. Opinions presented as settled facts, because the mind presenting them does not experience the distinction between opinion and fact in the way humanoid thinkers do. It is simultaneously one of the most practically useful and one of the most psychologically revealing documents to emerge from the criminal underworld of Waterdeep. Reading it alongside what we know about the current Xanathar's character, you get something that case histories and operational reports never quite provide. You get the inner logic, the self-image, the world as it looks from behind the eye that never closes. The Xanathar believes it knows everything, not that it is working toward knowing everything, not that it has gathered a great deal and is continuing to gather more. The project is, in its own assessment, already complete. the eye has already seen. And in the quiet of the lair, while Silger turns slow circles in the perfectly maintained tank, and the city above goes about its business in ignorance of what lies beneath it, the beholder floats at the center of the chamber it has made its own, and finds this belief to be the most natural thing in the world. It is an enormous, ancient, dangerous thing. It is also, in its way, a genuinely lonely one. Not in any sense it would recognize or accept as a description of itself, but in the way that a creature can be lonely when the only relationship it has that does not run through the calculus of threat and utility is the one it maintains with a goldfish, who will never understand that it is loved. Section 4. Pawns and Predators. Every empire, no matter how alien the intelligence directing it, requires people to do the work that the person at the top cannot, or will not do directly. The Xanathar floats at the center of its lair and observes and decides. But observation and decision are not the same as execution. Someone has to deliver the orders. Someone has to manage the flow of tribute from the surface wards. Someone has to ensure that the people who owe the guild money understand the consequences of failing to deliver it. Someone has to maintain the tunnels, coordinate the smuggling schedules, process the intelligence reports, keep the various factions within the organization from destroying each other at rates that would impair operational capacity. The beholder's genius for organization is real and considerable, but it requires humanoid hands, and those hands belong to an inner circle whose members are among the most dangerous individuals in Waterdeep, most of whom the city above has never heard of and would not recognize if they passed them on the street. The most important of these individuals, the one who sits closest to the Xanathar in terms of operational authority, and whose continued survival represents the strongest possible argument for consistent and reliable competence, is Amergo. His title within the guild structure is Major Domo, which in ordinary contexts suggests a household manager, someone who coordinates the domestic logistics of a wealthy establishment. In the context of the Xanathar Guild, the title covers considerably more than household management. Amergo is a dwarf, broad and heavily built in the manner of dwarves, whose lives have involved sustained physical labor and combat in equal measure. He is known among those aware of him by a second name, the Horned Dwarf, which comes from the pair of devil horns mounted on his helmet. It is a visual choice that communicates something precise about his opinion of subtlety as a personal philosophy. He is not interested in being mistaken for someone who can be approached without consequence. Amergo manages the guild's daily operations with an efficiency that comes from long experience and the particular kind of patience that develops in someone who has watched many careers begin and most of them end. and who has kept accurate count of how and why. He communicates expectations directly and enforces them consistently. The Guild's membership has learned to treat that consistency as a fixed feature of their environment, rather than a personal preference he might vary on a given day. His relationship with the Xanathar is, by the standards of the organization, as stable as any relationship with the beholder can be. The beholder has not found sufficient reason to terminate it across what is, by Guild standards, a considerable tenure. Amergo, for his part, manages the eccentricities of his employer with a pragmatism that suggests he arrived at a functional understanding of them some time ago and stopped finding them remarkable. This, perhaps more than any specific skill, explains why he is still the majordomo. Nazca Urgray sits below Amergo in the hierarchy and fills the role that every organization operating outside the law requires, but that few are comfortable describing plainly. Nazca is the enforcement side of the operation, the physical consequence that arrives when financial and logistical arguments have been made and not taken seriously. He is a dwarf who lost his right hand at some point in his career and had it replaced with a hook. The specific hook he uses is not a standard prosthetic. It is built larger than practical necessity requires, with a forward curve that reflects its intended use at close range with considerable clarity. Whether this represents a deliberate statement or simply the preference of someone who has long since stopped distinguishing between tools and statements is a question the people who work near him tend not to ask directly. His approach to persuasion follows a pattern consistent enough to be described as methodology, though it is worth being clear that what we know of this comes primarily from accounts given by people who either witnessed his work or survived encounters with him, rather than any documented operational manual. First contact is typically conversational, a clear reminder of what is owed and an invitation to resolve it without further involvement. If that produces no result, the demonstration phase follows, a visible indication of what the Guild can reach and what it can do to a person's livelihood or property when it chooses. The third phase is personal. That progression is not squeamishness. It is the logic of a business that prefers functioning revenue sources to the alternative. A merchant who has been given two clear opportunities to cooperate and understands with absolute certainty what the third contact means becomes a reliable payer for as long as they remain operational. Ott Steeltoes is, on first acquaintance, the member of the inner circle whose presence seems most anomalous in this company. He is a halfling. He is not physically imposing. He is not a strategist, an intelligence operative, or a combat specialist. His primary documented function within the Xanathar Guild is the care of one goldfish, This description, accurate as it is, entirely misses what Steeltoes actually represents within the organization's hierarchy. He is the person with the most consistent proximity to the one thing the Xanathar has genuine emotional investment in. That proximity is power of a very specific kind, not the power to issue orders or coordinate operations, but the power of access, of being the last face the beholder sees before the tank is attended to, and the person it looks toward when it thinks about what the fish needs. In an organization run by something that trusts no one in any full sense, the person who maintains the one trusted thing occupies a strange and very particular form of security. Steeltoes appears to understand this clearly. He maintains Silger with the dedication of someone whose continued comfortable existence is directly indexed to that fish's health, which it is. Thorvin Twinbeard answers the question of how an organization that relies as heavily on underground infrastructure as the Xanathar Guild does, on tunnels and hidden passages and mechanically secured chambers, and all the architectural complexity that makes the Undercity functional, maintains and repairs that infrastructure without constantly bringing in outside contractors who represent security risks. Thorvin is a dwarf of the technical tradition, a tinkerer and engineer whose skills cover the maintenance of existing passages, the construction of new ones, and the mechanical systems that protect the guild's sensitive holdings. He is not a combat specialist in the conventional guild sense. He is something more valuable in the specific context of the organization's operational needs. A person whose skills would be genuinely difficult to replace, and who therefore occupies a security of tenure that the more interchangeable members of the guild's workforce do not enjoy. The technical knowledge he holds about the guild's physical infrastructure is extensive enough that his continued good relationship with the organization is, from the guild's perspective, something worth maintaining carefully. The inner circle includes a presence that is, in its way, more unsettling than several of the others combined, because at least the others are species that Waterdeep has cultural categories for. The Xanathar maintains a working relationship with a mind flayer who operates under the name Nihilor. Mind flayers, for those approaching them without prior acquaintance, are tall, pale, tentacle-faced beings whose primary method of engaging with the world involves consuming the neural matter of creatures they find interesting or useful, and whose secondary method involves the direct psychic compulsion of other creatures to serve their purposes. Nihilor's role within the guild's operational structure covers functions that its more physically conventional members cannot perform. Psychic interrogation of captives who are not providing information through ordinary means. Mental influence applied to targets the guild needs to control rather than eliminate. Intelligence gathering through methods that do not require physical presence in the location being observed. The relationship between the Xanathar and Nyalor is not warm, which is entirely consistent with the beholder's relationships with everything that is not Silgar. But it persists because both parties find it operationally profitable. And because the Xanathar's anti-magic eye, which suppresses magic in a wide cone when open, provides a credible and immediate deterrent against the kind of psychic manipulation a mind flayer might otherwise be tempted to attempt on its employer. This mutual deterrence is probably the most stable foundation a relationship between a beholder and a mind flayer can realistically rest on. And it appears to have been sufficient to sustain the arrangement across the Xanathar's tenure in the guild. With the inner circle established as a functioning structure, the operations themselves become comprehensible as a system rather than a collection of separate criminal activities. The guild's portfolio is organized across several major categories, each running with a degree of independence, but all feeding upward through the tribute structure to the chamber below Skullport. Smuggling is the oldest and largest revenue stream. The guild controls the primary underground routes between Waterdeep's harbor and the interior of the city, and taxing what moves through those routes has been a foundational income source since the organization's earliest operational period. The goods that move through guild tunnels cover the full range of what the city's legal commercial infrastructure will not handle. Weapons moving in volumes that would attract customs attention. Alchemical materials whose legal status is complicated enough that paying the guild's transit arrangement is easier than navigating the official documentation process. Stolen goods of sufficient value that they need to move quickly from acquisition to liquidation without leaving a traceable path. The smuggling operation runs on a schedule maintained through Amergo's coordination across multiple entry and exit points in the city's underground, and the reliability of that schedule is itself a selling point. Guild tunnels are not the cheapest option. They are the consistent one. Assassination and targeted harm operate as a related but distinct service category. Access to these services requires either an existing relationship with the organization or an introduction through channels that give the guild sufficient information about the prospective client to be confident the engagement will not create problems that outweigh the fee. The Xanathar is understood to review significant contracts with an attention to strategic implication rather than moral consideration. An engagement that removes a figure whose removal benefits the guild's long-term position is desirable. An engagement that would destabilize something the guild depends on, a trade arrangement. A corrupt official whose particular corruption serves guild interests better than their replacement's clean governance would, gets declined regardless of what is offered. The Guild's interest in the outcome extends well beyond the immediate transaction. Intelligence trading operates more quietly than either of the previous categories and generates value that compounds in ways that direct criminal operations do not. The Guild's network of informants in the city above has been built across the full span of its operation, cultivated through the patient accumulation of individuals in positions of useful visibility. Dock workers who process cargo, servants in households where decisions are made, city watch members whose personal debts have been purchased and held rather than called in, scribes in administrative offices where documents of strategic interest are produced. Based on how the Guild's intelligence operation appears to function in canon sources, it is reasonable to infer that many of these individuals do not know with certainty who they are ultimately selling to. The aggregation of what they provide, filtered through the Xanathar's perfect recall, and its analytical attention to implication and connection, produces a picture of the city above that is more complete in specific categories than what the city's own governance possesses. This intelligence serves the Guild's own operations first, but it is also sold selectively at prices calibrated to maintain buyer dependency rather than enable substitution. You buy from the Guild's intelligence apparatus because what it has is not available anywhere else. You continue buying because access to it, once established, changes how you operate in ways that make not having it feel like a loss, rather than a neutral state. Extortion, referred to within the Guild simply as the tax, covers the direct payment arrangements that businesses and individuals in the city maintain with the organization. The structure of these arrangements reflects the cold logic described earlier in the Xanathar's relationship with all its subjects. The rate is set at what the payer can sustain without becoming unable to pay. The consistency of enforcement is what makes the system function. A protection arrangement with the Guild means something specific. The people who would otherwise steal from you do not. The fires that consume rival operations do not consume yours. The information that would end your career or your freedom is held rather than used, for as long as the payments continue arriving on schedule. For as long as that qualification sits quietly inside every arrangement the Guild maintains with the surface world. The memory that catalogs everything never degrades. The account is always running, and in the cool, quiet dark of the chamber below Skullport, the creature that built this entire apparatus floats in its permanent still attention and knows, with the perfect and unbroken certainty of a mind that has never lost count of anything in its existence, exactly what every single one of its subjects owes. Section 5. The Dragon Heist and the Legacy of the All-Seeing Eye. 500,000 gold dragons. Sit with that number for a moment. Not the abstract financial weight of it, though that weight is staggering enough on its own. 500,000 individual coins, each one stamped with the authority of a city that did not know they were being taken, moved in silence and darkness from the legitimate treasury to a location so carefully concealed that the people who went looking for them after the theft was eventually understood could not find them with years of effort and the full investigative resources of Waterdeep behind them. 500,000 gold dragons sitting in a vault beneath the city, waiting with the patience of inanimate wealth for someone clever enough and informed enough to find the thread that would lead them to the door. The man who moved them was Daggled Neverember, and the story of how he came to hide them is inseparable from the political history of Waterdeep. In the years before the dragon heist crisis brought everything into collision, Neverember served as the open lord of Waterdeep, which is the one position in the city's peculiar governance structure that exists publicly rather than behind a mask. The open lord is the face of the council, the spokesperson and administrator through whom the city's governance is communicated to the world. It is a position of enormous prestige, and in the hands of someone willing to use it with sufficient creativity, considerable financial opportunity. Neverember used it creatively. Over the course of his tenure, he extracted from the city's treasury a sum that his contemporaries struggled to fully account for, because the extraction was conducted with the care of someone who understood institutional accounting well enough to operate within it without leaving obvious tracks. The gold was eventually moved into a hidden vault beneath the city, secured behind access conditions that made it effectively unreachable to anyone who did not possess the specific knowledge of where it was and how to open what was guarding it. When Neverember was eventually removed from the open lordship and his financial arrangements came under scrutiny, that knowledge was the one thing that could not be recovered through any official investigation. He had arranged for it to be elsewhere. The key to the vault was not a key in any conventional sense. It was a stone, a specific stone whose properties went considerably beyond the ornamental. The stone of Galar was, in a fact that takes a moment to fully settle, not actually a stone in origin. It was an aboleth, one of those ancient aquatic beings whose minds contain memories stretching back to ages before the gods remade the world, which had been transformed through magical means into an enchanted object. The transformation had not ended the aboleth's awareness. The consciousness of Galar persisted inside the stone in a compressed and object-bound form. And within that consciousness, it held the precise memories Neverember had arranged to be embedded there. The location of the vault, the nature of its locks, the specific information needed to reach a fortune that was otherwise permanently beyond access, complicating the stone's utility further. It required more than simple possession to reveal what it held. 3 gems, described as the stone's eyes, had been removed and hidden separately across the city. Without all 3 eyes restored to the stone, the full information about the vault's location and means of access remained incomplete. This arrangement meant that even someone who held the Stone of Galar in their hands had not automatically won the race. They had won one leg of it. The eyes still needed to be found, and the eyes were themselves subjects of pursuit. The Xanathar became aware of the stone and its connection to Neverember's hidden gold through the Guild's intelligence network. That vast apparatus of informants and purchased loyalties described in the previous section. The moment the connection between the stone and 500,000 gold dragons sitting beneath the city became clear to the beholder's analytical mind. It committed the Guild to the pursuit with an urgency that was, by its own historical standards, unusually direct. It was not the only organization that had reached the same conclusion. The Xanatharim, the Black Network, represents a criminal and mercenary organization whose history predates even the Xanathar Guild, operating across the breadth of Faerun with a membership and resource base that dwarfs any single city's criminal infrastructure. The specific Xanatharim presence in Waterdeep during the Dragon Heist period was organized around a figure operating out of Kalat Towers, a clone of Manchun, the Xanatharim's founding figure, who had established a foothold in the city and was pursuing the gold with the resources and ruthlessness that the Black Network's long institutional history made available to him. The Castlenters were a Waterdeepian noble family whose pursuit of the gold was driven by something entirely different from the straightforward accumulation that motivated the Xanathar and the Xanatharim. Lord and Lady Castlenter had, at some earlier point, made an arrangement with the Archdevil Asmodeus, and the terms of that arrangement required a specific payment in gold to secure the safety of their children. Their need for 500,000 dragons was therefore not greed in the conventional sense, but desperation with a deadline, which made them unpredictable in ways that pure greed does not produce. And the fourth player in the race was perhaps the most unexpected of all. Jarlaxle Beener, the legendary Drow mercenary captain who leads Brigand Dairth, one of the most capable and adaptable mercenary companies in the Underdark, and increasingly in the surface world as well, had arrived in Waterdeep operating under an assumed identity. He presented himself to the city as a human impresario named Zardoz Zord, running a traveling entertainment operation called the Sea Maiden's Fair from the docks. The disguise was thorough enough to operate within the city's social fabric, and behind it, Jarlaxle was pursuing the gold with the particular quality of attention that someone who has survived as long as he has in the environments he has navigated brings to everything he does. His motivations, based on what canon sources suggest about his character, and his broader ambitions, likely extended beyond simple acquisition of the gold. Jarlaxle tends to want things at multiple levels simultaneously. Whether he wanted the gold as wealth, as leverage, as a means to some longer political objective, or some combination of all three, is something the sources leave open to interpretation. What is clear is that his involvement added a layer of complexity to an already complicated contest that none of the other factions had fully anticipated. Into this four-way pursuit walked the adventurers. They arrive at the story's beginning through the yawning portal, that famous tavern built around the open shaft leading down into Undermountain, and get pulled into the larger crisis through a cascade of connected incidents that begins small and expands rapidly into the full weight of what is actually at stake. From the perspective of every faction pursuing the stone, the adventurers represented a variable that needed to be assessed and then either incorporated or neutralized. The Xanathar's approach to them was consistent with its approach to everything. It watched. It gathered information. It attempted to bring them within its operational orbit when that appeared useful, and when their actions created friction with guild objectives, it escalated its response in the methodical way that it escalates all responses, from the manageable to the severe. The guild's specific operations during the dragon heist period are documented through the module's structure, rather than through any external historical account, which means the details we have are the most reliable version available of what the guild was doing and why. Nihilor, the Mind Flayer, was actively involved in the abduction and psychic interrogation of individuals the guild believed might hold information about the stone's location. The guild used its tunnel network aggressively to move people and information in ways the surface factions could not easily counter. Amergo coordinated operations from the guild's undercity infrastructure and the Xanathar itself, rather than remaining in the patient observational remove that had characterized the guild's approach across most of its history, was genuinely and visibly invested in the outcome in a way that altered how the organization moved. This investment revealed something important about the guild's character that centuries of more controlled operation had kept partially obscured. The Xanathar's paranoia under sufficient pressure becomes a strategic liability. The perfect memory and the analytical intelligence remain intact under stress, but the absolute conviction that everyone is a potential threat, the inability to fully trust any lieutenant's judgment in a fast-moving situation, the tendency toward direct and severe response when unpredictability enters the picture. These qualities produce an organization that is very powerful in stable conditions and somewhat less stable in ones that change quickly and require coordinated responses across multiple variables simultaneously. The adventurers, moving through the crisis with the particular quality of agency that adventurers bring to every situation they enter, were exactly the kind of rapidly changing variable that the Xanathar's psychology struggles most with. People who are not inside the guild structure, who do not owe it tribute or fear its enforcement, who are making decisions based on their own judgment rather than any of the pressures the guild normally uses to make behavior predictable, are genuinely difficult for the beholder to account for in real time. The eye sees everything it can see. It does not always see everything. The full resolution of the dragon heist, which of the 4 factions ultimately reached the vault, and what became of the gold, varies across the different paths the adventure can take, and is therefore not a single settled canon outcome in the way that a novel's ending is settled. What the module does present as fixed is the existence of all 4 competing factions, the nature of the stone and the vault and the gold, and the specific characters involved on each side, including the Xanathar's inner circle and their operational roles. The parts we have covered in detail across this telling are the parts that canon sources confirm. The specific outcome of the race is the part that the story, by design, leaves in the hands of the people playing through it. What the dragon heist reveals about the guild as an institution, more clearly than any previous episode in its centuries of operation, is that the organization's greatest strengths and its most significant vulnerabilities flow from exactly the same source. The beholder at its center is the origin of its coherence, its reach, its longevity, its perfect intelligence network, its cold consistency. All of it. But the limits of that beholder's psychology are the limits of the empire. It is a structure built precisely to the dimensions of one mind, magnificent within those dimensions, constrained by them in ways that only become fully visible when something genuinely unpredictable pushes hard against the walls. The guild has absorbed every challenge in its history and returned to itself each time. The title has passed and remained intact. The eye symbol has been on the walls of Waterdeep through divine catastrophes, governance changes, the rise and fall of every competing organization that has tried to claim territory in the same city. The Xanathar Guild as an institution has outlasted everything because the thing running it has a relationship with time that no human ambition can match. And because it was built from the beginning around a name rather than a person, a role rather than an individual, an idea of permanent watchfulness that survives every particular watcher. Right now, somewhere beneath the cobblestones of the City of Splendors, in a chamber that appears on no map the surface world has access to, A goldfish turns slow circles in a perfectly maintained tank. The water temperature is exactly right. The light falls at the correct angle, and nearby, floating with the stillness of something that has no reason to move, because everything it needs to observe is already within the range of its attention, the Xanathar watches. The streets above are full of people who have never looked down and thought carefully about what might be looking back up. Merchants counting receipts, guardsmen finishing rounds, nobles returning from dinners, where the conversation touched on the city's criminal element and the general difficulty of controlling it. All of them moving through the warm light above the stone, with no particular awareness of the empire beneath their feet. The eye is open. It is always open, and it sees all of it. Thank you for listening. Take care of yourselves out there. And remember, somewhere, an eye is always watching.